The sound of a perfect shot echoed through the elite shooters club, quickly followed by the resounding applause of a well-dressed crowd of wealthy patrons. They were adorned in designer shooting gear, making it clear that they belonged to the exclusive world of high society sports. Blake Radcliffe lowered his custom Remington rifle, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his sun-kissed face as the target revealed yet another bullseye. This was his kingdom, a world where money, power, and skill coalesced to create an invisible yet impenetrable barrier between the elite and everyone else. For Blake, there was no doubt this was where he belonged. But if you've ever been underestimated or made to feel invisible, you might want to stay for what happened next. The moment that changed everything in America's most prestigious shooting range. Emma Miller stood just inside the entrance, clutching a worn leather purse. Her attire, simple blue cardigan and department store jeans, immediately set her apart from the crowd, making her stick out like a dandelion in a rose garden. At 35, she was at the crossroads of youth and experience, neither young enough to turn heads, nor wealthy enough to demand respect. Emma felt the sting of her presence being dismissed without a glance, but she held her head high. The receptionist, a young woman with flawless blonde hair and a practiced smile, looked up from behind the desk. She glanced at Emma and quickly looked away as though Emma were nothing more than a distraction. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, trying to push past the invisible wall the receptionist had erected. "I'd like to register for today's open practice session." The receptionist's gaze swept Emma up and down. Sensible shoes, a simple ponytail, before she looked back down on her tablet, clearly uninterested. "Membership cards only," she replied, her tone cold and dismissive. Emma took a steadying breath, pulling out a crinkled envelope and holding it up. "I have a day pass." "It was a gift," she explained, her voice slightly firmer. Blake Radcliffe noticed the newcomer from across the room. At 42, Blake was the epitome of success, five-time national champion, Olympic gold medalist, and the face of Remington's premium line. His family's vast oil fortune had given him access to the finest training since childhood, and his natural talent had propelled him into the ranks of the nation's best. Well, Blake drawled loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on the way to Walmart." His friends, positioned around the room, chuckled on cue, amplifying Emma's discomfort as she continued her walk towards the basic range, her eyes cast downward to avoid their stares. Rebecca Johnson, the club's manager and a former competitive shooter herself, caught the comment. She frowned, her eyes narrowing at Blake's words. Though she disagreed with his remark, Rebecca chose silence over confrontation, understanding that Blake's influence could crush any resistance. Emma found a spot at the far end of the range, placing her purse on the small shelf in front of her. With practiced hands, she unwrapped a cloth to reveal a standard Glock 19. Nothing like the finely crafted, custom pieces the elite members of the club wielded, but more than sufficient for someone who knew how to handle a firearm. Blake and his friends, sensing an opportunity for amusement, moved closer to her station. $10 says she can't hit the target, one of them joked. Blake scoffed and grinned, the challenge in his voice laced with arrogance. "Make it $10,000. I bet she's never held a gun in her life." Blake strolled over to her station, his boots clicking on the polished floor. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his false politeness dripping with condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a knitting circle." His words were sharp, the kind that made Emma feel small and out of place. Emma raised her gaze to meet his, her hazel eyes locking with his piercing blue ones. The look she gave him was steady and unflinching, a silent challenge that momentarily threw him off balance. "I'm just here to practice," she said softly, her voice calm and even. Blake recovered quickly, a smug grin returning to his face. "Practice? Honey, this is a place for serious shooters. $10,000 says you can't hit the bullseye from 50 yards. Emma's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She was ready for this and more. "I don't have that kind of money," she said, her voice still steady. Blake's smile widened, relishing the opportunity to make her feel even smaller. If by some miracle you make the shot, I'll pay. If you miss, you leave and never come back. Deal." Rebecca, having overheard, stepped forward, a frown tugging at her lips. "Mr. Radcliffe, perhaps we should let our guest practice in peace," she said, her tone soft but firm. Blake dismissed her with a wave of his hand, never taking his eyes off Emma. "Stay out of this, Rebecca. We're just having a friendly wager." Emma's gaze dropped to her left hand, where a simple gold band encircled her finger. She twisted it once, a subtle gesture only the most observant would have noticed. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Blake's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he quickly masked his reaction with a triumphant smirk. "Excellent, ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a show." What no one noticed was the change in Emma's posture as she picked up the Glock. Her spine straightened, her shoulders relaxed, and her feet shifted into a perfectly balanced stance. No one saw the expert grip or the controlled breathing that signaled someone well-versed in the art of shooting. And no one realized that the simple gold ring on her finger once belonged to one of the most legendary snipers in SEAL Team 6 history. 3 years ago, Emma had stood under a gray April sky at Arlington National Cemetery, the crisp snap of the Honor Guard's rifles cutting through the solemn silence as her husband's casket was lowered into the ground. Master Chief Nathan Miller, one of the most decorated snipers in the Navy, had earned the nickname the Ghost among his peers. The official report claimed a helicopter crash during a classified mission, but Emma knew better. There were things about Nathan's death that would never be revealed. Nathan had taught her how to shoot during his time stateside. Their sessions had begun as a safety measure, but they evolved into something much more, a way for them to connect, a way for Emma to become stronger. "You're a natural," Nathan had whispered the first time she hit a bullseye. He had seen in her what many hadn't, an innate calmness under pressure, the same calm that made him one of the best snipers in history. He had trained her, and in turn, Emma had become a skilled shooter in her own right. But after his death, Emma couldn't bring herself to pick up a gun. Nathan's firearms remained locked in their safe, untouched. It wasn't until a package arrived from Michael Reeves, Nathan's former teammate, with a day pass to the Elite Shooters Club and a note that read, "Nathan would want you to keep your promise. 3 years is long enough to grieve alone. Come back to the living." That Emma decided to return to the range. Now, standing in the Elite Shooters Club with Blake's challenge hanging in the air, Emma felt a stirring inside her. The same calmness that Nathan had instilled in her returned. She lifted the Glock, and everything else faded away. The first shot rang out. It was crisp, precise, and clean. The target moved slowly towards her, building suspense with every mechanical click. When it finally stopped, Emma's shot was dead center in the bullseye. Blake's amused expression faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Beginner's luck," he muttered under his breath. Rebecca, unable to contain her admiration, stepped forward. "That was an exceptional shot, Miss Miller." Emma said nothing but calmly placed the Glock on the counter, her expression unchanged. Rebecca, recognizing the expertise in Emma's technique, made a suggestion. "Perhaps you'd like to try our advanced range facilities?" Before Emma could respond, Blake interjected. "Hold on. One lucky shot doesn't make her a pro. Let's see if she can do it again." He pulled out a checkbook and wrote down $50,000. "If you can hit 3 bullseyes in a row at 75 yards, I'll pay. If you miss, you leave and admit you cheated." Emma took a steady breath. "I'll take your challenge," she said quietly. "But if I win, the $50,000 goes to the Veteran Support Foundation." Blake hesitated, but after a moment, he nodded. "Fine, but I don't expect you to make it." The challenge was set, and the competition began. Blake was a seasoned competitor, his technique honed over years of training. But Emma was different. She moved with a quiet confidence, her actions smooth and deliberate, as if each shot she took was guided by years of memory and training. As the distance increased, the gap between their skills closed. Emma was proving herself, shot after shot, making a mockery of Blake's earlier dismissive attitude. By the time they reached the final station, the pressure was palpable. Blake, still confident in his experience, finished first placing 9 of 10 shots in the innermost rings of the target. "Not everyone can handle championship pressure," he remarked, loud enough for the nearby spectators to hear. Emma stepped up, her hand steady. She remembered Nathan's words, "When the pressure's on, fall back on your training. Let your body remember what your mind might forget." She adjusted her stance, breathing deeply, and took her first shot. The crack of the gun was followed by a perfect hit. Shot after shot, Emma continued her flawless performance. By the 6th shot, the crowd was on edge, and when Emma prepared to take the final shot, something flickered across her sight line. A glint of light from Blake's entourage. Emma paused, focused, and squeezed the trigger. Another bullseye. The crowd erupted into applause, and the atmosphere shifted. Blake's face drained of color as he processed what he had just witnessed. He turned to Rebecca, a sense of desperation in his voice. "This can't be happening. There's no way she did that. She must have rigged something." Rebecca stepped forward, holding up a tablet. "The equipment was rigged, Mr. Radcliffe," she said calmly, her voice carrying a sense of finality. But not in Miss Miller's favor. She showed the security footage of Blake's technical advisor tampering with the firearms. The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Blake's reputation was in free fall. Emma had not only beaten him at his own game, she had done so with integrity, in spite of deliberate sabotage. Blake's facade crumbled as he realized the full extent of his failure. With nowhere to go, he grudgingly agreed to a settlement, donating $100,000 to the Veteran Support Foundation, accepting a 3-year suspension from competition, and issuing a public apology. Emma, however, walked away from the ordeal with more than just a win. She had honored her husband's memory, found redemption, and became a symbol of resilience. Months later, as the Foundation's new marksmanship training program for veterans took shape, Emma stood before a group of soldiers, her voice stronger than it had ever been before. "Today, we begin with fundamentals," she said, "because sometimes the steadiest hands belong to those who have endured the greatest shaking.